How would you define endurance?
Endurance to me is longevity. And when we take that into people's health and wellness, a lot of people are talking about health span versus lifespan. Endurance is longevity. So if you want to be in it for the long haul, you have to be resilient and rested and strong and soft and a good teammate and a leader. There's all these two sides of every coin that you learn. And often people will look at me and just think, I'm hard as nails, I'm super tough, I never fail, I'm not afraid. And that just isn't the case. I do these hard things to practice, to be resilient, to not to be fearless, but to learn how to manage and adapt to fear or to make decisions when it's really hard.
Today's guest is Rebecca Rusch, endurance professional athlete, 7-time world champion title holder in multiple sport disciplines, elected to Mountain Bike Hall of Fame and elected to Gravel Cycling Hall of Fame, keynote speaker as well as best-selling author of Rush to Glory, Adventure, Risk and Triumph on the Path Less Traveled. Rebecca has spent over 30 years chasing first and going on never before imagined adventures. She has a wealth of knowledge on how to operate outside of your comfort zone to constantly evolve and reach all that life can offer. Rebecca's journey includes podium and championship titles, but also groundbreaking adventures and projects that have shaped her both personally and professionally. And on a much more personal note, her energy, positivity, and inspiration to any challenge she meets is truly inspirational. Rebecca's principles of exploration, curiosity, pushing boundaries, and making a difference in the world are just so inspiring. And if you haven't watched Blood Road already, I highly recommend for you to watch it now. It documents her amazing journey of 1,200 miles bike ride along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to reach the crash site and final resting place of her father, a US Air Force pilot who tragically lost his life during the Vietnam War. Rebecca was the first person to ride the entire length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and listening to her stories has motivated me to seek out my own adventures and step beyond my comfort zone. I hope that you will enjoy today's episode as much as I've enjoyed recording it. Enjoy the show. Rebecca, welcome to the Charlotte and Giselle show. I am so excited to have you on today. How are you?
I'm great. And the feeling is very mutual. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you.
Oh, excellent. Well, Rebecca, as one of the top female adventure athletes in the world, I wanted to start off by asking you, where does your call to adventure come from?
I love that question. It's a great question. And often, people will categorize me as an athlete. And I've started calling myself an explorer, an adventurer. And it really comes, I think I was born with that. I remember as a child wanting to camp out in the backyard and being really drawn to nature. And when we'd go on road trips and my mom would take us to the national parks, I remember being just really inspired by seeing new places, especially when they were outdoors. And so I think I was born with that sense of adventure, and it's just evolved over the years and turned into a passion and a career. But I do think I was born with it.
Born with it. And was one of your parents in particular an influence to that call to adventure?
It's hard to say. Well, I grew up in a single parent home. My dad was killed when I was just 3 years old. He was shot down in the Vietnam War over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. And so we grew up with a single mom, and I had a sister. So it was a house full of girls, and mom had to work all the time. And so, you know, raising two young kids in sort of the 70s and 80s, that was pretty uncommon. And so she went to work in the computer industry and really had to put her head down. And so we definitely inherited our drive and sense of commitment and work from my mom. And then, later I've been able to reconnect with stories about my dad, and even though I didn't know him personally, I've heard that he was a traveling musician. He, lived in his car for a while, which I did as well. And so I do think maybe the sense of adventure and curiosity comes a little bit from my dad's DNA. And then the work ethic comes from my mom's DNA.
So the perfect combination of the two.
Hopefully, it's just, as you know, sometimes one gets out of balance with the other. And so, yeah, my career is a little bit of trying to balance, the hardworking, gritty personality, which serves sometimes, but then also the adventurous, exploratory personality.
Mm, of course. And with so many title and world championship and incredible achievement, what is your current sense of identity, if I may ask? If you were asked
Mm.
to define yourself, what would you be?
That's a really good question, because as an athlete over the course of my career, I was always called an athlete. But I've really been exploring this lately as I evolve my business. And like, what am I? Who am I? Why am I here? A lot of us ask those questions of ourselves. What is my purpose? And much of that, I realize there's this athletic thread through my life that is the through line. But I've also launched 3 businesses. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a dog mom. I've bought and fixed up houses. And so, often people want to put somebody into a little bit of a box with what their athletic career is. But I'm starting to really look at the decades of experience that I've gained over being an athlete. And where I am now is I'm really excited. Actually, I've been sharing and putting together what I'm calling the athlete operating system for anyone who wants to achieve in any arena. And by adopting really an athlete's lifestyle, mindset, way of setting goals, way of being, and really getting people to embrace the fact that if you have a body, you're an athlete. And if you want to do your best at anything, adopting the athlete operating system is the way to go, the way to success. And so really now I'm really trying to hone a lot of my experience in education and wisdom and get that out to more people, with getting them to move and be outdoors and to really feel better mentally, physically. So to your question, what am I? Athlete, adventurer, explorer, but also an educator and a teacher, and hopefully a mentor for other people.
Mm. And what would you say are some of the key mental components of that athletic operating system if we were to look at the mindset or the resiliency?
Yeah, well, and what we're in a very exciting time where science is now proving things like the efficacy of things like breathing, meditation, sleeping, hydration. We've kind of always known these things, and, ancient, they've been used for a long time for health and wellness, but science is now catching up and saying, oh, if you meditate 10 minutes a day, you'll sleep better. If you sleep better, then this will happen. And so, and we have wearables and technology. And so I'm really excited because people are not just athletes, everyone. We're getting proof that if we make these lifestyle adaptations with exercise, with rest, that they really do work. And, as humans, we want to see that if we're going to do something, we want it to work. And some of it was always a little bit fuzzy, like, oh, I should relax. I think I'm relaxing. But now you can really track what's going on in your brain and body. And so, really, a lot of the main things for an athlete, number one, you have to move. Anyone who is not exercising and moving on a really regular basis is just missing their opportunity to be their best. And people are catching on to that with standing desks or getting out of the chairs, but we're a very sedentary we're sedentary people, and that's not good for the body. And the science is catching up and showing us how bad that actually is. I think there's a stat that like sitting is like the equivalent to smoking and taking the number of years off your life. So the first thing with adopting, an athlete lifestyle is to move. And however that looks for you, walking your dogs, jumping rope, riding a bike, whatever it is. I know you're a big runner, but getting the body moving. And what's happening there is, you know, I like to say brain flow equals, or I like to say blood flow equals brain flow. And what happens when we move, you're releasing neurochemicals, you're releasing serotonin, all these neurotransmitters that are making you feel good. And they're putting together more synapses and communication in your brain. And so I think that that's really exciting in a practical sense. Anybody knows that maybe you're stuck at something, you're on your computer and you're kind of trying to figure something out. You go for a walk or you like leave it for a minute and you go for a walk and all of a sudden you've got all these creative ideas and something happens. And that's the blood flow and the neurochemicals in your brain activated when we exercise. And so I'm trying to convince more people that if you get moving, that's the first key to success. After that, then it's things like having a coach, which is basically a growth mindset. No matter how old we are, having an expert or somebody to teach us, to learn, to take classes, whatever it may be, to not just coaching classes as an athlete, but coaching classes as a speaker, if you're a speaker, or business classes. So having a team as an athlete would around you, I've learned is a pretty essential aspect. Even though I'm an individual athlete, there have always been people helping me, people who knew a little more than I did. Just like you would take your car to a mechanic, you go to an expert to learn or fix or grow. So I think the team aspect and the sort of growth mindset is really important. And then something really obviously right up your alley is the burnout and the requirement that athletes, people, humans, we need to rest and we need to have a schedule daily, weekly, annually that involves hard workouts, hard days, and then relaxation, and then hard and relaxation. And, that's called periodization in sport, where an athlete's incline or your fitness doesn't progress at a linear, upward slope. It's sort of like a little jagged, it's upwardly trending, but there are jagged peaks and valleys where your body needs to take a rest. And so I think as high achieving people, we kind of always just want to do, oh, I did that last week. Okay, I'm going to do this next week. I'm going to be better next week. And then I'm going to be even better and stronger next week. And sadly, it's not sadly, but the body doesn't work that way, or does the brain. And so respecting the concept of periodization, where you have hard days, you have easy days. You have a hard morning, then you take an easier afternoon. And that's for the mind and the body. And I'm sure you can really resonate with that. It's right up in line with your work and your burnout experience, and pushing and pushing. So humans can't just keep pushing. And so really getting high achievers to embrace rest and relaxation is kind of a hard thing. But again, the science really helps show that. You can see on your sleep tracker, you can see, how you feel, but you can actually see those things in your heart rate variability, some of those metrics that are really cool to see even before you're sick or stressed. You can kind of see your body responding to it. And it's kind of instead of waiting until you really got sick or feel burnt out, you can start to see those trends. And so those are kind of some of the key components of the athlete operating system. Does it make
Um,
sense?
yes, it really does. It actually resonates a lot. And how much of this system did you put in place in your own journey as an endurance athlete? Especially, how much did you prioritize your sense of self-care and recovery so that you could keep on achieving, but also make sure that you were looking after yourself in a way that was sustainable?
I love that question because, and people will always ask, well, when are you going to retire from being an athlete? And never, because it's part of who I am. I'm 55 years old, and I love to tell people that because I want people to see what a lifelong athlete looks like. And so, to your question, all of the concepts of the athlete operating system come from 40 years of experience of being an athlete in various different sports, from running to paddling to biking to rock climbing. And I will tell you, when I was younger, I made a lot of mistakes. And that's what I'm trying to help people fast track a little bit. A lot of mistakes in overtraining, which is the same as burnout in work. So, overtraining, injury, not resting, not eating well. When I was a younger athlete, I sort of figured, oh, well, I'm training so much, I can eat whatever I want. And, I've grown and learned and learned a lot really in the last, I say the last 10 years. I've really started to focus on learning more about all the extra things, not just how much time do you put in training on the bike or whatever, your 2 hours or 1 hour that you do in the gym or on the trail. Lots of people can do that and they're achieving that. I really think the secret to maximum athletic achievement or anything is what happens off the trail, off the bike, out of the gym. And that's where I've really been focusing on mindfulness aspects. I brought in breathing techniques that I never really used before, meditation that I never really used before, and really honing into what is the mind doing, and how can we trigger that and relax it. And we often think, oh, well, I trained this many hours this week. I went to the gym for 30 minutes. Great, I did it. But then not realizing the whole rest of your day was essentially another workout because for your body, because you were getting the kids, you were going to work, you were making the dinner, you were doing the thing. And then all of a sudden you're like, why am I too tired to do my workout in the gym? And so what happens is none of those things are getting the benefit that you're going for because you're not resting in between, or you're not learning how to um, relax the nervous system. And so I'm
Mm.
really kind of into the nervous system right now because we do have to go to work. We do have kids or responsibilities. We do have things that we have to manage. We want to go to the gym so that we are healthy, but fitting all that in is actually a challenge for a lot of people. So when I say to people, oh, well, adapt an athlete lifestyle, they're like, well, I don't have time for that. But you can fit those things in the spaces in between. And you can sit and do breathing. You can do walking meetings. You can stretch for 10 minutes while you're sitting on the floor watching TV or playing with your dog. So I really like to try to help people, one, get outside and move, but to find ways to sprinkle mobility, wellness, athleticism into their everyday little moments here and there.
Mm. And you've mentioned outside, and I know the outdoors is
Mhm.
such a key component of your extraordinary career. Could you tell us maybe a little bit more to what has drawn you initially to mountain biking and rock climbing and paddling and all those extraordinary things that you do outdoors?
Well, it's curiosity. And again, I keep going back to science. Science shows that nature is healing for people. This color green, the sky, the smells, the sounds, it's really good for your brain, which is why people are drawn outside. But for me, it's been a curiosity of wanting to go somewhere, wanting to explore. And really, that was a lot of my reason getting involved with professional sports was I got invited to go travel or go do something. And I was like, okay, yes, I'll go do it, because really it was a curiosity to kind of see what that country was like or what was up at the top of that mountain. And the curiosity is one of the biggest motivators that our brain has. And if you think about, like, oh, I wonder if, and that's always been a really great trigger for me. I've done a lot of different sports, and even within cycling, a lot of different types of cycling. People are like, well, why do you keep changing? And why don't you just stick with one thing? And that's because curiosity is really motivating. and changing things up. And I mean, it's sort of cliche, variety is the spice of life, but it is actually true for your brain and your motivation of doing different things. And so if I take that to somebody who's just trying to fit in a half-hour workout 3 days a week, doing something different, instead of going, oh, doing the same workout in the gym at the same time, like it gets boring and then we're not motivated and we don't want to do it. So not only does your brain get sort of bored with it, your body also gets bored with it too. If you do the same exercises all the time, the adaptation isn't as big as it would be if you mixed it up and
Mhm.
did something different. And so I'm always like, when people are like, oh, I'm a runner, I'm like, can I take you on a bike ride? Or, just because it's so great for the brain and body to change and to do something different and to, not pigeonhole yourself into one thing. It's a way to challenge your brain and body, to adapt. And so the variety and curiosity has been a big motivator for me. And it is for most people. I mean,
Mhm.
you must have an example from, like, why did you take up running?
Oh, I was
Curious of that.
very practical, actually. It's probably not the sexiest story, but I was looking to cover the most amount of step in the least amount of time.
Yeah,
I was a busy, burnt out lawyer that
yeah,
had a very packed schedule. I was super time poor and full of back pain, exhaustion, burnout. And I was actually listening to some of the great running adventure from Dean Karnazes, and that's how I got into running.
that.
So, yeah, I think it's nice to have an inspiration, someone that you can role model and sort of get inspired by, and that just gets you out of your head. That was the biggest thing for me, working in an office, being a lawyer. I needed to switch off my brain and switch on my body, which I didn't do for decades, right? I was a very much encouraged by my father from a little age to do it all with the brain, and I got rewarded for being an intellectual high achievers, and I never got rewarded for doing sports.
Yeah.
So I had to discover that on my own.
I love that you said the concept you have to switch off your brain, and I would love to open people to think about it in a way. You're not switching off your brain, you're actually switching on a different part of your brain that's
Mm.
getting neglected when you're sitting
Yeah.
and looking on your computer. And so it's not mindless, it's actually mind expanding to do exercise. And when people talk about the runner's high and they talk about the feelings of, climbing a mountain and doing something else, you're activating and turning on all these other parts of your brain that you were neglecting. And so when real intelligent people and high achieving work people are like, I don't really need to exercise, I'm like, well, don't you want to get the most out of your brain? And they're like, oh yeah, there's other areas I can turn on. And exercise does do that. It opens up neurotransmitters that are helping your brain make other connections and other communications. So you're
Yes.
not turning it off, you're actually turning on a different part. And then you're letting your work brain, your analytical brain, you're letting it rest. And which is great because you're letting the analytical brain rest. You're letting the creative brain kind of explore and look around wherever you're going and whatever you're doing, so that then when you come back to your desk, the analytical brain is fresh again because it got a rest. And that's the same things with meditation, with breathing. They're all things to trigger your nervous system to calm down and take a minute. And often people think, well, I'm too tired to go for a run and I just can't do it, I'm too exhausted. But from experience, if you just go out the door and do 20 or 30 minutes, you actually feel energized. You have more energy when you're done, which seems counterintuitive, but it's because you're releasing all sorts of great chemicals and things when you move. And so when people are like, I'm just too tired, I can't, I'm like, just go for a walk. And I
Yeah.
have this thing I call a 20-minute rule. When I don't want to do a workout, I'm like not feeling it. It's like, okay, I'm going to go for 20 minutes. Um, And then if I still don't want to do it, then I'll listen to my body and turn around and come back. Because we might just need a rest day. There are days when you're like too tired to do it. But is it your brain or your body talking? And often it's our brain is too tired to do it. But so I have a 20-minute rule. I'm like, I'll put on my stuff, I'll go out and do it for 20 minutes, and then I'll decide. And the reason for that is it takes about that long for dopamine, serotonin, for all of those chemicals to get released in the body to let your brain go, oh, no, actually, I'm okay. I'm going to keep doing this. If your body still truly is like, I'm too exhausted, I can't, then after 20 minutes, you can make the rule with sort of more information instead of your brain making the rule, the decision, your body's making the decision. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned that. And I think you get more creative and more confident as well. I mean, there is nothing like the feeling of being on top of a mountain and you think, I've done that. I find this so exhilarating to get to the sense of achievement, right?
It's I love that you said that too, because I feel like sports and the outdoors, that's our training ground for life. That's the place where we can go practice success, failure, grit, determination, teamwork, resiliency. We go to practice that in the sport, and then we come back and we take those skills into life.
Mm.
And it's why, it's shown that girls who get involved in sports at a young age, there's a higher percentage of them that will go on to be C-suite executives. There's all sorts of studies of, if people do sports, they do better in life. And so you're exactly right. This feeling of achievement, this feeling of accomplishment, of like, I worked really hard and I achieved this thing, you take that feeling back to your desk, to your family, to wherever, your workplace, your arena. And then all of a sudden you have the skills of like, okay, I've been lost before in the woods. I can get myself found again. Or, okay, I've fallen off my bike before. I can get myself up and get myself home. So you develop that muscle memory of strength and resilience instead of having to get like shut down at work and you don't have the skills yet to deal with it, or you have a tragedy at home, or you have something really hard happen. If you haven't really honed and developed those skills, then we don't have the tools to cope. And
Mm.
so sport is the only arena I know where we really can practice all of those things.
I was wondering, how would you, considering all this incredible endurance achievement, would you define endurance if you had to give it your own definition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Endurance to me is longevity.
Mm.
And when we take that into people's health and wellness, a lot of people are talking about health span versus lifespan.
Mm.
And to me, yeah, endurance is longevity. So if you want to be in it for the long haul, you have to be resilient and rested and strong and soft and a good teammate and a leader. There's all these sort of two sides of every coin that you learn. And often people will look at me and just think, I'm hard as nails, I'm super tough, I never fail, I'm not afraid. And that just isn't the case. I do these hard things to practice, to be resilient, to not to be fearless, but to learn how to manage and adapt to fear, or to make decisions when it's really hard. So that's why I do the ultra endurance stuff, because it really is an amazing teacher. There's nothing like being cold and hungry and lost and scared, and you find your way out of it. It was in I've been doing a lot of winter bike expeditions in the last 5 years, and that's like riding the Iditarod Trail where they do the dog sled race, but on my bicycle. I've gone out and done that in the winter, and so that event, you are self supported on your bicycle. All of your sleeping bags, stove, equipment, it's all loaded on the bike, and you're self supported. And so you're surviving in the wilderness in minus 40 temperatures in Alaska in the winter. And that has been the ultimate, and you're navigating yourself and, melting snow for water. And that kind of survival has really, really taught me so much that I bring back into my everyday life. And I mentioned earlier that I've really started adapting breathing and some mindfulness techniques into my sport. I really started using that in Alaska, and using certain types of breathing to stay warm, certain types of breathing to calm down, another type of breathing to activate and, energize. And I really started playing with that out in Alaska a few years ago. And it was really cool to we think of breathing, sitting on a cushion, with your eyes closed and doing yoga poses. But I take the breathing onto the bike and into my workouts and into my workplace. And that's been really, really cool and has helped me relax or energize or stay warm or stay focused, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell my clients, tell me how you want to feel, and I will tell you how to breathe.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. I didn't know any of this, 10 years ago. That's what's so exciting, I think, for people is that they're not new tools, but we have all these tools at our access that are free. Breathing, movement, mobility, eating well, like those are, not necessarily free, but they're accessible. And yeah, you don't have to join a fancy gym or get the fanciest equipment or spend a lot of money to be an athlete and to embrace the athlete in you.
Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about these adventures in Alaska and how it was like navigating through all these really tough conditions, the weather, and being on your own and having to cope with that sense of almost primal survival? Can I say that?
It absolutely is primal. And, you could hear the wolves howling and see, the moon is full and the wolves are howling. Like it was like a movie. It's crazy. But the reason I went to go do that event in Alaska was I was at a point in my athletic career where I felt unmotivated. And I had come home from the biggest, most important ride of my life, which was the ride I did to go find where my dad was killed. I went and rode the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, a 1,200-mile journey. We made a beautiful film about it called Blood Road. And I launched a foundation. And, it was the most important ride of my life to connect with my family and my purpose. And a few years after that, the film had come out and we'd done a film tour. And then I was a little bit lost of, I've just done the most important thing in my life. Now what? And I realized I hadn't done a big adventure since Blood Road, and I hadn't done anything that really scared me, that I was unsure about. And so I'm not good in the cold. I don't really like the cold. And so I'd been doing long distance bike stuff, but a friend had encouraged me, said, you should do winter bike expeditions. I was like, no, 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 I can't do it. I would never do it. I would never do it. And then finally, after a bunch of prompting, I said yes, because I realized that it scared me and that I needed another challenge. I needed something that I was unsure about. And what happens if you do something that scares you is you prepare. And I was literally terrified of losing fingers, toes. I didn't know how to survive in sub-zero temperatures in the winter. And so it made me train really hard. It made me study the maps, the equipment. It really made me commit to the experience, because the price of failure was being alone in Alaska and freezing to death. And like, literally, it is survival. And people are like, oh, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Look, I mean, I have decades of experience with endurance sports. And so I knew I could do the distance. I just knew I was learning a new skill to do the distance in cold weather, and to survive in cold weather and make sure I don't sweat and make sure I'm eating, and, you know, just kind of the logistics of that, like all your electronics, your water, all your food, it has to be on a vest, all close to your body. Otherwise, everything freezes. And so there was a lot of, it was exciting to learn new skills, but also the fear was a really big motivator. And so I went to Alaska the first year, and um, I ended up winning the event, but in my mind, it was so ugly. I made so many mistakes. It wasn't smart. I didn't want to sleep outside because I was afraid I was going to freeze, and so I just pushed through and didn't even sleep. And so the next year, I vowed to come back and do it better. And I trained more. I made all my own food, put it in my freezer to make sure it was palatable when it was frozen. And I went back the second year and was just like standing on the start line, super confident, like, I'm going to win this whole thing. I like was so confident. And 30 minutes into the race, I made a navigational error, and you can pick your path. And so I went straight, the rest of the group went left, and I ended up that first, like, a couple hours into the race, I finally realized my mistake, and I'm sitting there looking at my maps and going, do I just go back and quit? And realizing I was never going to, catch back up. And so I was really faced with, I trained all for this. I went through a little bit of ego of like, I'm not going to win the race anymore. I was all prepared. I should just go back to the start and forget it all. And then I sat there and I really evaluated, and it was snowing. It was getting dark, and I was alone, and I'm pushing my bike through the snow that was knee deep. And so I made the decision. I said, look, I have trained for this. I trained to survive. And so I'm going to survive instead of win. And I really made that conscious effort. And I was so proud of that finish, because it was some of the worst conditions of that the race has had, and -50-degree temperatures and just really insane. But I survived, and I'm more proud of that second year than the first year. And then the third year, I came back and put it all together and had one of the best expeditions of my life that I'm really proud of. But it took all those failures, all that fear, to kind of, and a number of years to really work up the skill to do what is one of the proudest rides of my life, of riding my bike in Alaska and surviving and doing it well. And the third year I finished third overall, first woman, but third overall. And so it's not about the placing, because like I said, the second year I was really proud of my survival. And I think about that a lot when people think, what is your definition of winning? Like, what is it? Is it being first, or is it being your best? And those are sometimes they're the same thing, but usually they're two different things. And I put on a big race here in Idaho, and, one person will be first, but everyone who comes can win, depending on what is your definition of winning. And I think that's really important for high achieving people to really define. And it changes your definition of winning from decade to decade, year to year. And so I think that's an important thing. In business, we are always developing mission statements and vision statements for our companies, but do you have one for yourself? Do you know what you stand for? And especially as an entrepreneur, I mean, you're a great example of, you have shaped a business based on what you stand for. And like, look, people don't need to burn out, and I can help them. And you shaped a whole business based on it. That definition of winning now is very different than your definition of winning in the first part of your career. I can tell that already. And so, but being able to articulate that, I think, is really important for people. What does winning look like? What does it feel like in your body?
Mm-hmm. And of course, when we talk about winning, there is also sometimes that winner's curse, right? Whereby you complete that goal, or you complete your personal best, or that championship, or that title, or that sense of having done what you wanted to do. But then, of course, you just start to obsess about the next goal and the next big thing and the next big achievement or the next big mountain to climb, literally or metaphorically. I would like for you to walk us through your mind. How do you manage that? Is it ever enough? Is it ever complete?
Oh, you're getting into some really good questions. I love that because, and you touched on it a little earlier. How do you define yourself? I'm in that moment of redefining what winning is for me. And as an athlete, I've won tons of world championships, all sorts of other things, and that's very intoxicating. I'm super proud of them, and they're amazing. But I'm not in a place where that's as important to me anymore. And I think what happens, and I have other people that I know, is when you're in your 20s and 30s, you are motivated to build your resume, to prove yourself, to put wins in the box on your resume, on your race calendar, whatever it is, because at that point you're kind of still shaping your career. And so checking off lots of wins, lots of championships, it's really motivating to go grab for those things. At a certain stage, when people have achieved, at a certain stage, you don't need to prove yourself anymore because it's on your resume. And suddenly you can look back and go, oh, people do respect me as an athlete. They do respect my work because you've got a body of work to show. When you're in your 20s and 30s, you don't yet have a body of work. And so I think as we get older and get into, what I think is the exciting part of someone's career, sort of the sort of crystallized intelligence stage. You've built all this intelligence, this resume, this skill set, and then how do you shift and take all that knowledge and that skill set and win in another way? And so your first question to me was, what are you doing now? It's and you're doing it as well in your career, is sharing information with people to help other people reach their wins, to grab their podiums. And so there's very much a shift for me. And I will not lie, there was a transition where I was still putting my worth on how many races I won, because that is our society. We measure first, second, third, and my career was measured first, second, third. My sponsorship, my life, my career, how I made money was based on how I finished. If I finished first, second, or third. And so it was very hard to shift away from that and to provide worth and feel validated with other things. And that's come from launching an event, seeing people, reach their own finish lines, or, I have a foundation where I get more people outside on bikes. And suddenly I'm starting to see that, wow, like those things are super rewarding for me too. I can stand at the finish line of the event that I put on, and the last place finisher is in tears and is so happy they rode 100 miles. And for me, that feels as good as any podium I've ever stood on. And so that has really helped me shift that, getting past measuring myself, my value, my worth, is a lot bigger than a world championship. Don't get me wrong, those things are launch pads. I'm really glad I spent the decades I did doing it. And now for me, the measure is different. And there's a neuroscientist, Moran Cerf, that shared with me, there's multiple studies on this, that there are like the 5 things that make your brain the happiest, that make people happy. When they're asked, what do you want to be? Everyone's like, I want to be happy. And there's 5 things, the top 5 things, and it's exercise, sleep, altruism, so giving back, doing something for other people. So exercise, sleep, altruism, spirituality, and that can look any way, just the sense of something bigger, something, something else going on. And what is it? I've got to make sure I've got 4, right? Sleep, exercise, altruism,
Altruism,
community is the other one.
community.
Yeah, and
Mm.
being together, that we need to be together. And so I think about those things quite a lot, of if you can put that kind of a menu together for yourself. And so this is coming back to the question that you asked me: how do I define a win? How do I change my mindset based on, instead of finishing first, but winning in a different way? And it comes from taking those things and making sure that I'm I'm putting those things into my life of, altruism. I'm sleeping, I'm exercising, I'm spending time with community, and I'm having a spiritual aspect to my life. And for me, a lot of that is time in nature.
And if we go back to this amazing list and we take some items away, so for instance, when it's you alone in Alaska with no one around you but the wolves, of course, you still have your community in your head and you know you're loved and you know you're supported in many ways. But how do you manage that self talk and those voices in your head? And in that moment, how do you become your own head coach?
Mhm.
What does that sound like? Can we go inside Rebecca's
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, one tactic I've used my whole career is I talk to myself in the third person. And there's actually science behind this too, of like, what would you say to your friend if they were saying, "Oh, I suck, I can't do this, I should quit, I'm terrible, I'm lost in the woods, I don't know what to do." You would say to your friend, "Well, look, you've trained for this. You know how to do this. Just like get back on the bike and eat a snack and go forward." So often I sort of try to take my emotion out of it and I speak to myself as I would, what would I say to a friend or a stranger? And I use that tactic a lot to sort of get myself out of the emotion of like, oh, this is happening. Because often when we're speaking badly to ourselves, it's emotionally charged and
Yes.
generated from emotion. And so by speaking to yourself, you sort of rationalize and take your emotion out of it. So I use that tactic a lot. I
Can you
also,
give us some
yeah,
example? Can
yeah.
you give us of things you would tell yourself?
Yeah, so in Alaska, it's like, oh, I'm freezing cold. I don't know where I'm going. It's like, okay, well, first put on clothes because you need to survive, and then let's look at the map a little bit more. Really, you do kind of get sort of factual with yourself. I'm like really rational, and take the emotion out of it. Or like if I'm trying to ride down a technical section, of course. So I got involved with mountain biking and I wasn't very good at mountain biking. I was good at endurance, but not good at the technical skills of it, and would end up, I couldn't ride a lot of the downhill stuff. And so a lot of these 24-hour races I would do, I would have to jump off my bike and run down the sections because I wasn't skilled enough to, but I would still win races that way. And so I remember in those sections, I'd be pre riding the courses and just being like, I shouldn't even be here. I shouldn't do this event. I'm stink at this. I'm terrible. I suck. And then I would just, in the race, it was really interesting. I'd be like, well, fine, just get off and run your bike then. Like, what are you going to quit? What are you going to tell people? I think that's another tactic I use in the middle of an event or in the middle of something hard is like, well, what are you going to tell your friends and family at the end? What story do you want to tell? Do you want to tell them that you quit because you were scared? Or do you want to tell them you were scared, but you didn't quit?
Mm.
And so I also think about other people. And even if I'm alone and I don't have that community, it's like, what do I want to tell my friends, my husband, my peers about this thing I did? And so I think about that a lot of like, what story do I want to tell? And that's the community aspect. Even if you're alone doing something, there are people in your life that love you and care about you that you want to share with. So even if you're doing something alone, I actually imagine like I would do this in races. Like, what would I give if I get interviewed? What will I say to the media about how my race went? And you can do the same thing. What will I say when I get home, from work today? To my spouse or whoever, what will I say to my children? And so I like that idea of storytelling, of what story do I want to tell someone, and then go
Mm.
home and tell them, you know
Yes.
and the story doesn't have to be I won. The story can also be vulnerable of like, I was really scared and cold and lonely and I didn't know what to do, and I just pushed on, and I'm really proud of that. So I'm not saying people have to be perfect or not make mistakes, but we have a choice in how we respond to a situation. We always have that choice. There's a situation, how do you respond? And I think that's a lot of the lessons in sport and not quitting is okay, I have a flat tire, I'm lost, this has happened, that's happened, I lost all my food, or my water's frozen. Then it's like, okay, there's a situation that's really challenging and difficult. What do you do? And we always have a choice. And sometimes the choice is to walk away. Sometimes the choice is to leave the situation. But a lot of times the choice is to sort of figure it out and push your way through and or take a sleep, take a rest, and then try again the next day.
What's been one of those most challenging moments where you maybe experienced this almost life or death situation and had to really apply that rational thinking to survive and continue to thrive?
That happens every day in those Alaska events because the temperatures are so cold that really there is absolutely no room for error. And that's what I can't do those events all the time because they're quite emotionally and physically stressful, but I love that kind of commitment. And that is partially when people ask, well, why do you do these hard things? Because I like the level of commitment. And I think anyone who's signed up to run a marathon or to, climb Kilimanjaro or any of those sort of big things that we sign up for, or to take on a big project that you don't really feel quite ready for. There is motivation in fear, and there's also motivation in tackling something really, really big. And so I use talk to myself all the time, but Alaska is very committing, which is why I went. Going back to what we were saying, I needed to have that level of commitment because I was sort of lethargic and unmotivated, and so I pushed on the fear as a motivation lever. But yeah, I'm thinking to stories from, well, I was on the USA Women's Whitewater rafting team for a while. I competed in whitewater. I had no whitewater experience, but these girls invited me. These really high level paddling women invited me to be on their team because I was a rock climber, and so I had strong upper body and was developed. And they're like, "You should be on our whitewater raft team." I'm like, "I'm terrified of water. No, I'm not going to do it." Um, and that was really interesting because I actually tried to talk them out of having me on the team because I didn't have water experience. And they said, no, no, but you have the right attitude and we can teach you how to paddle. And so that was really interesting talk that I had to use for myself. In these boats, there's 6 women in a boat. And so I had to keep telling myself, okay, just follow their instructions. They are the experts. If they tell me to do this in this way, I'm just going to do it because they were world champions already and whitewater women and super well known in the water community. And so that was an example of me just really, really trusting in a team that was around me and trusting that they saw something in me I didn't see and trusting that they weren't going to steer me wrong, because I'm in the boat with them. They need me to do my part. And so that was a really cool experience of kind of being thrown off the deep end, literally, and just trusting in the people around, and trusting that they knew what they were doing. I was like,
Mm.
okay, I'm going to do this, and trusting that I could follow the instructions and not just be like, well, yeah, well, what about this? Because I was totally the new person. So I just sat there in the boat and I just like paddled my heart out. And their instructions were really paddle as hard as you can and don't fall out of the boat. And like 2 things, that's all I have to do. So there was a real simplicity in like being with a really elite team, when you aren't yourself elite in that sport. I think about that with hiring people and building a team is that you can't teach character, but you can teach skill.
Yeah.
You can teach somebody to do the job, but their character is who they are already. They come with that when they walk in the door.
Mm. Absolutely. Yes. And speaking of character and fortitude and personality traits, I know that you've been very often referred to as badass and the queen of pain. And I would like us to perhaps explore a little bit that incredible ability that you have to endure and sustain some of perhaps most unimaginable pain level threshold for us mortal. What would you say happens in that moment, and what has led you to experience these levels of elite endurance and pain management?
Oh, pain. Yeah, I was given the nickname the Queen of Pain, which is kind of funny, and that has stuck. I like to think of it as Queen of Perseverance,
Uh,
maybe.
by the way, I should ask you first, how do you feel about having been given that nickname? Do you even like it?
Well, I'm honored by it because it was meant as a compliment, but I also think that people have a sort of a weird relationship with the word pain, and we think of it as, you know, um, like going to the doctors or getting sick, or pain is often not taken as a nice word for us. But pain is also, I like to think of it, it really is a portal. And we've already talked about doing hard things. So if you can think of what is the hardest thing you've done in your life, maybe it's for a mother, maybe it's having a child, childbirth. Maybe it's finishing your doctorate, maybe it's whatever it is. But when I ask people, what's the hardest thing you've done in your life? And they come up with a story, and you can see people start to passionately talk about it and talk about it, and they talk about how they got through it and how what they did. And it's I think about it with racing. I really remember the events that were a struggle, that were a push, versus the ones that were just sort of walk in the park. They were fun, but they weren't growth. They weren't evolving for me. I didn't evolve as a person. So I guess to your question, I use sport to evolve as a person. It's my place to grow, and I use pushing my physical body to really push my emotional body and to learn about myself. And it's very similar to a vision quest, or to, a lot of techniques that people use similar to meditation, where they're sitting for 6 hours or doing something like that. Is the body really is the portal to access your mind. And so the ultra endurance sports for me, they become a master's degree or a PhD, or a place to keep learning about who you are and what you are capable of.
So in those moments, is you surrender to it, or you embrace it, or you conquer it? What would you say? Is it almost a leaning into it, accepting it? What is it?
Yeah, there's not a conquering. We don't conquer nature or fear or any of those things. We learn to move with them, and we learn to, flow, more like a water or a stream would go around a rock or something, or go over a waterfall. Or is that there's a way through things that can be smoother and easier. That's not to say it's not physically and mentally challenging. It absolutely is. But I go to those places prepared with knowledge, with maps, with training. And that's the part, like I call, control the controllables. And for any situation, you can study, you can be ready before you go. And then when you go, you've got to be open to some of the unknown and the adventure and the exploration. But if you go physically, mentally trained, then you feel confident in letting the adventure happen. Does that make sense?
Of course it does. Yes. And speaking of adventure, Rebecca, I was wondering if you could perhaps indulge us a little bit in this incredibly captivating story around your father and you wanting to ride the entire length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit from a psychological standpoint, how did that feel? And what was it like going on that trail? And did you feel more connected to the memory of your father at that point? Was there a moment of closure, or was there a moment where you really felt closer to him in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form?
I love that you asked about that. My favorite ride in my whole life was doing that expedition. And I wanted to go on that adventure for a couple different reasons. One, I wanted to I don't think anyone had ridden the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And there was this sense of curiosity of like, this would be a really cool adventure. And I had just heard the name of that trail from the stories of, oh, your dad died. He was shot down over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I didn't really know the historical context or know much about it. So as I got older, I started kind of researching and looking into it. And then as a professional cyclist, the idea came of like, what if I went and rode it? And then I could go to the map coordinates, go to the place on the map that we have from these reports. And I have the skill as an adventure athlete to go do this. And so I put together the expedition, one out of curiosity and excitement to see the place, but also to stand in the place where he died, to meet the people, to feel connected to the culture there, and sort of a three-dimensional, walk through history and the present. And so doing that ride, and I rode with a Vietnamese woman who was a cyclist. I didn't know her. She didn't speak English very well, and I don't speak Vietnamese. And so the two of us rode together for 1,200 miles, with the intention of going to the place where my dad's plane was shot down. And we were going through the jungle. The trail wasn't there lots of time. There was tons of logistical challenges. We needed a machete to get through some areas of the jungle. But quite honestly, the physical part was not hard for me, because I'm trained for that. I'm practiced for that. The emotional part, and especially, doing a film and talking about my emotions the whole time, that was the hard part for me, because I've spent my life sort of putting up this tough exterior as an athlete, just like, I don't need any help. I've got this. I'm strong. I'm resilient. And I had to be exactly the opposite of that. And this is part of the reason people ask, well, why did you have to ride 1,200 miles just to go to the place where your dad died? And I knew I needed to make myself really physically tired in order to be able to open up emotionally. So I needed to go on this journey to let myself experience whatever it was I was going to experience. And I didn't know, but I just knew I needed to ride my bike a bunch of miles before I got there, to immerse in the culture. I didn't just want to go to a spot. I wanted to see the people and see the country and talk to people about the war. And, Hugh N's father served in the war as my dad did. And so I really wanted to do an immersion, physical and emotional immersion. And it really was just that. And people have often said, oh, it must have been amazing closure. And it's exactly the opposite. I feel like I have a relationship with my father now. It was an opening, a connection. My family's closer now because of it. My sister and I are closer. And I found a purpose and launched a foundation in his name. I found a purpose for my riding, and was very clear on that ride that I could do more with my world championships and my podiums, and launched the Be Good Foundation in his name. And we connect people through bikes and help people find freedom through the bike. And
Mm.
that's because of my dad. So
How
it was an
beautiful.
amazing ride. It's changed my life, and I'm so grateful for it, and sort of the gift of being able to do that journey.
And what was the sort of spiritual message that you wanted to
Mm.
send your father in a way by being on this quest and getting to that place specifically?
I wanted to find him. I wanted to find out more, because, no one really talked about the experience. It was quite painful. And so I needed to go looking for myself to have a relationship with him.
Mm.
And I felt him, and I feel his presence now, and I hear his words. Be good is how he signed all of his letters home from the Vietnam War. And so that's the Be Good Foundation, are his words and his handwriting. And so I can recognize now that he's been present in my whole life. He's in my DNA, and he's been around. And I just wasn't really listening until I did that ride. And now he pops in, and I feel like he's teaching me, even though he's not physically here. And so I know he's proud. I know he's happy I went to find him. And um, yeah, and I guess that's the, for anyone who, we've all lost someone close to us, and we will lose people. And I've just felt a real sort of connection to people, even though they're gone, through that experience, and realizing that I see him everywhere, I feel him everywhere. And same with other people that I've lost. I really had to learn that, while we're physical beings, we're made up of all of the people and experiences in our life. They're all in us, in our cells. And so everyone you've met, everyone you've touched, everyone you've worked with, it's all a part of you. And I think
Mhm.
that was a really beautiful thing that I came away with. And that is what motivates me to be a positive influence for other people, because I know we can all shine a little light in everyone else's lives and help other people, and that it makes a difference.
Mm. Absolutely. I'm so glad that you've shared this story. I was especially touched by it at many levels. My grandfather served in the French military and was injured in the Vietnam War as well. He came back. He didn't pass, but I know the connection. So I was very happy that you were willing to share that story with us today. I appreciate it's very personal, so I'm very grateful.
Did your grandfather talk to you about the experiences?
Oh, yes.
Oh, he
Yes.
did. Good.
He did a lot actually. It was quite profound back in those days. Of course, there were no communication in the way that we know now. And when he was shot and nearly died, it was very, very serious. He lost a lot of blood and was shot around the belly area. My grandmother, on the other side of the world, remembers that moment where she just felt something awful just happen and told us the story about this moment. And of course, she found out, much, 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 much later, the date of when it happened to my grandfather and all that he had to do to survive and the little access that he had.
Mm,
And that story really stayed with me in terms of, that resiliency and how much he just wanted to come back to her and how he had to survive. And yeah, it was a beautiful part of my upbringing, and having a military member of my family that had gone through such hardship
yeah.
and through such mental toughness and physical endurance as well has stayed with me in
Yeah.
many ways. Mm.
Yeah, and I wouldn't wish anyone to have to go to war, which is why, I say that if we can use sport as a way to push ourselves and develop that resilience, it's a much better, a much healthier way, than anyone having to go through an experience like that, like your grandfather did.
But you're right as well. It is, I think, a very healthy way to rekindle our inner warrior. I think we all have
Yes,
one. I
we
think we all
do.
have an inner warrior. It's very primal. We're
Yeah,
built this way, and I really believe that when we lose touch with sports or don't practice sports, we actually become too comfortable, and overall that can erode our sense of self and confidence and have a negative impact on all forms of performance, not just physical,
yeah,
intellectual as well.
yeah. I couldn't agree with you more.
And that comes from someone that spent decades sitting behind a desk. So, I had to learn this the hard way.
Yeah, but we can always learn. We're always growing and evolving.
Well, that brings me to the very last question, if I may. Speaking of growing and learning, if you were to have a play date with little Rebecca and met her when she was just a 5-year-old little girl, perhaps with a lot of sadness and pain through what she had to go through, what would you say to her?
I wouldn't say anything. I would just hug her and I would tell her she's not alone.
Mm,
It's taken
thank
me
you.
a long time to learn that.
Yeah. She knows that now?
Some days.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we're always, I love that you brought that up, because we are always our inner child. should come out, should go play, should go run in the woods. But that inner child also needs to be nurtured and cared for. And so we bring our joys and our fears into, we don't really lose those, I believe, as adults. So, as a child, I felt alone. But I also felt adventurous and playful and wanted to be outside. And so, can we take those as adults, the parts of us that are very primal, as you said, they're just very, we're born with them from young experiences, and take them and nurture them in our adult lives. So nurturing the kid who loves to play, but also hugging the kid who feels alone. And we don't outgrow those things. We learn new mechanisms to support each other and support ourselves.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Rebecca, I'm so grateful for your time today. If our audience wanted to connect with you, what would be your preferred way for them to do it?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and social media, and my website, it's all my name, Rebecca Rusch with a C.com. So any of those outlets would be great. And I would love to invite you to come bike ride with me sometime.
I
In
will say yes to that wholeheartedly. Yes, let's
Yeah,
do
we've
it.
got
It's
some fun camps and rides in Idaho, or we can just go hike up a peak or something when you're
yeah,
out this way next time.
I'll come out this way.
I would love that.
Okay, we have a bike date then. It's on.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Rebecca. I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you. Be good.
Thank you for spending your time with me today and listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe so that you can receive weekly updates. And if today's message resonated with you, please remember to share it with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who could really benefit from this episode.